Well, I am. It's worth saying. Obviously, we've spoken about what we are anticipating from a Labour government. It's worth saying that we have been planning for this for some time, and so we have expanded our case team recently, and we've taken on new staff, and who are already heavily engaged in defending our members. So we do have the backing to, you know, as I said, these are not idle threats. This is not just bluster from us. We really will absolutely, fight flat out to defend freedom of speech for our members, and to protect it, such as it is. There's one thing that we do want to talk about, Tom, actually, which is a nice victory of ours that colleagues have won recently, which is a case of a pub. And there have actually been quite a few incidents like this, some in the public domain, some not. And this is a story that rhymes with those other cases that listeners may have read about. So it's a pub in Newcastle, the Cumberland Arms. And they said to one of their patrons that you will no longer be allowed entry within the pub's boundaries, because the patron in question was a parliamentary candidate representing the Party of Women. And the customer, Liz, was wearing a hoodie that read Women's Declaration International, and clearly promoting women's sex-based rights. And so she was barred from this pub for this. There's a very similar case in Northern Ireland that's in the public domain. There's a crowdfunder ongoing for that at the moment. And so our colleagues wrote to the pub and pointed out that, in fact, gender critical beliefs are indeed protected under the Equality Act. And what did the pub do, Tom?
The pub wrote back and agreed. Well, I'm not sure they agreed. They wrote back and they said, I can now advise you that my client has written to Miss Panton to advise her that it has reversed its decision to bar her from the Cumberland Arms. So there was a wake up. It was a wake up call for the pub that actually, exactly as you say, gender critical beliefs are protected. But the element I found chilling in this is that she was also a prospective parliamentary candidate. And we made this point in our letter, which is that any subsequent court proceedings, the court would be required to have regard to her rights under the European Convention of Human Rights enshrined in the Human Rights Act 1998, in particular her right to freedom of thought, freedom of expression, freedom of association, and the prohibition on discrimination of grounds of political or other opinion. And it is something we saw that, during the election campaign, we have had a number of people in a variety of parties across the spectrum, the political spectrum, come to us and say they've had trouble with venues for hustings, they've had trouble with political parties, all sorts of different kinds of issue, although this issue of gender critical beliefs is one that clearly comes up most. And it worries me, Ben, because the political process, quite rightly, we have purdah and the media is restricted in terms of not being imbalanced if they're going to delve into issues around different political parties. But venues and such as pubs, which are often the location for political events, and theatres and cafes, restaurants, all these places are now thinking that they can shut people down. And in that way, they are actually affecting the democratic process at a really critical moment for the country. And that is something we need to have more think about more, I think, is that's another implication of the current crackdown on freedom of expression in this country.
Well, I think I was about to say so many people, but it's not so many people. A significant minority of people really do seem to think that Britain is awash with fascists and fascist sympathizers, and that gender critical feminism is one manifestation somehow of this, of a kind of intolerant extremism. And you can just imagine the kind of the sanctimonious thrill that a pub landlord would get from fighting against fascists by banning somebody from a pub for wearing a hoodie about defending women's rights. You know, that's how it's obviously bonkers when you spell it out. But if that's the world that you think you live in, if you really think that Britain is a seething hotbed of fascism that's about to erupt at any moment, you know, you would get that kind of moral thrill from fighting against it. And I think that's what so many of these kind of little dictators fall to is that feeling of self-righteousness.
Yeah, and I also think a lot of this is, as we know, what do you do when you're young at university? What's your first job? First job is go to a bar, go to a pub, pick up a bit of work there. And a lot of these folks are youngsters, students, the people who often raise the initial complaint or are worried by a T-shirt. And they've never come across outside the TikTok world that people have this variety of views. And of course, a variety of views is what a pub is all about. Just a couple of weeks ago, I went down to the local here, which I love, and there's a lovely pub, and they have a wall of pictures of the dogs of the locals that are all the sort of local heroes of the pub. You know, the dogs are right up at the front of of what the pub sells itself on. But yeah, I was talking to a scaffolder, and that scaffolder had completely, you know, I suppose outrageous views in sort of class terms. And yet I wouldn't have bumped into that scaffolder, you know, anywhere other than in a British pub. We rub shoulders with, you know, different classes. Middle class people meet working class people. Scaffolders meet people who work at the Free Speech Union. You know, it's just what a pub is for. And in so doing, you come across views. You think, well, you know, okay, you've had a few, whatever. And of course, none of this is at all equivalent to having too many, getting violent, and when you're quite rightly pushed out, or harassing someone, or intimidating someone physically, or however, or even verbally intimidating someone. That's a completely different thing. That's behavior. That's conduct. This is just rubbing along with people in your local pub. And if we lose the pub, we lose so much.
My local, when I was a student down in Exeter, an excellent pub called the Bowling Green. It had a massive stack of board games, and so you could go there for your Sunday roast, and then spend a sort of lazy Sunday afternoon playing board games instead of doing any actual work. I'm just thinking now, in hindsight, back in 2012 when this was going on, it was absolutely fine. But my friends and I would quite often play a game of Risk, a very drunken game of Risk after a roast dinner, sat in this pub. And I can only imagine what the manager of the Cumberland Arms would have thought of this naked imperialism as we all set out to conquer Africa and Asia. I expect we would have been barred as well.
Well, you started it. You invaded Poland.
I think I might have done, actually.
I think you might have invaded Poland. Yeah. You want to start with Australasia. That's the key.
Yeah. I apologize. No wish.
Oh dear, no, that's a whole discussion in itself. I think the importance of the public house in our society, in English society, particularly.
Well, may it continue.
I think that's probably all we have time for, isn't it, Ben?
Yeah, I think so. I think so.
So on that note, I think we should wish our listeners a very good week full of free expression.
Yes. Goodbye, comrades, and good luck.